Hello, I'm Pauline Maloney, the creator and host for The War Years, Vietnam. The Vietnam War was a 30-year bloodbath, reflecting the conflict between the United States, represented as the capitalistic country, and versus the Soviet Union and communism. This series will feature interviews with Vietnam War veterans, and today my guest is Mike Maher. Welcome to the program, Mike.
Thank you.
Mike, I know you served in the Army during the Vietnam War, but before we get to those war years, would you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I was born in Freeport, Illinois. Came to Dubuque after the 5th grade and was in Dubuque for a couple years. Then we moved to Colorado for a year, and then I did my high school years at Wahlert and senior. Graduated from senior in 1965. I joined the Army. In fact, I left for the Army the day after I graduated from high school.
And why so quickly?
Oh, probably, I think I wanted to punish my dad or my girlfriend who dumped me or something like that. But I remember how much suffering they went through when that drill sergeant got me out of bed the first morning. But anyway, those are my early years.
Whereabouts were you? Did you go first when you enlisted?
Well, I went in. I actually enlisted to be a missile repairman.
Oh, so you didn't think you were going to go to Vietnam?
No. In fact, I was going to be in Chicago, I think, for the whole 4 years or whatever. I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for basic training. And then through the testing that the Army gives you, they decided that I was qualified to become an officer. And of course, if you accept that so-called challenge and you fail, you're in Vietnam within a week if you wash out or anything. But so I signed up and agreed to become an infantry officer. And that was I was still 17 when all that was negotiated. Went to Fort Ord, California, where I was there. After graduating from advanced infantry, I actually went to drill sergeant school and was a drill sergeant for a short period of time, and then went to Fort Benning, Georgia for officers candidate school. They call it 90-day wonders, but it's actually about 183 days. I was there 13, 14 weeks, and then they discovered I was too young, and that excuse me, I would have you had to be 19 to receive a commission, and I would have been like 18 years and 6 months. And then
So what do they do with you?
Well, they sent me back to Fort Ord, California, where I had such interesting assignments as a lifeguard and a water safety instructor. I was in the military police, and in fact, to get around the federal law, they had an exchange program with local law enforcement, because the military was, quote, versed in crowd control. And if you remember the 60s, things were getting a little crowdish. Control was a problem. But the military had absolutely no experience with drug abuse, which was starting. This was the hippie generation, the 60s, yeah. And so to get around federal law where federal troops couldn't do certain things, they had what they called an exchange program. And so I ended up working in police work, actually, and a little bit undercover, and then I was finally old enough to go back to Fort Benning and do officers candidate school. It was the infantry officers candidate school.
So you finally did go back down?
Went back, graduated in 1967.
Now, you mentioned earlier that if you didn't make it through, that you'd end up in Vietnam within a week. How big a class did you start off?
We started out with around 180, 190. We graduated, I believe it was 93. All but one of my class was killed or wounded in Vietnam. So the attrition rate, both during school or during the course and afterwards, was pretty high.
Yeah, that's what I was curious about.
Life expectancy, I believe, of a second lieutenant in Vietnam was about 12 seconds. And if you live 12, then you'd live 24, and correspondingly goes up. No, after that,
You still weren't ready to. You weren't going to Vietnam quite yet. Didn't you
No.
have more schooling?
Yeah, well, schooling. I went to jump school, which is one of the more insane things in life, which is to jump out of a perfectly functioning aircraft.
I've always wanted to do that.
I'm sure skydiving is fun, but in the military, with all the gear, back then I was in shape, and my 180, 190 pounds was a little bit better distributed, but with a helmet and weapon and a backpack and everything else in the parachute, you become about a 250-pound rock, and you fall. But I guess it would be enjoyable. But, of course, then you're so young and stupid, you're going home, so you don't really care. From there, I went to probably one of the worst 9 weeks of my life, which was Ranger School. And that was a combination of Fort Benning, then you went up in the mountain phase up in Dahlonega, Georgia, and then there was the jungle phase down in swamps of Florida, down around Eglin Air Force Base. From there, I went to another hellhole, which the Army had a lot of them back then. It was Fort Polk, Louisiana, which is...
I think snakes,
yeah,
to me.
armadillos. Young, dashing second lieutenant, all of 19, not old enough to drink, buy a car, or anything, but you had to have a new car. Had to have buddies of mine sign for me. But couldn't really impress any of the ladies because there was nothing around there but armadillos. So, and then after Fort Polk, where I was a training officer, I went to Panama, Fort Gulick, and went to what they called Jungle Warfare School, which was a couple of weeks of jungle that was much, much thicker than ever ran into in Vietnam. And from then, came home to Dubuque for 2-3 weeks and headed over to my first tour.
You know, when I interviewed other veterans from the World War II and for Korea too, they mentioned that the trip over took like 2 weeks on a boat.
No.
How fast?
It was about 25 hours on a flight, and it was a commercial flight. It was a commercial charter. They chartered.
That's too quick. It's almost too quick. I mean, one moment you're safe in the States, the next minute you're...
Well, you know, when you go through the course, let's just say I was indoctrinated. I mean, obviously I grew up, my father was a World War II Battle of the Bulge veteran, John Wayne. I mean, it was expected. You fought for your country, or you went in, everybody did, and there was no question, it was just automatic acceptance. And, getting into Vietnam, they process you for 3 days, I think it took, and then I went to the 1st Infantry Division.
And you were stationed where? We've got a great map up right now.
Well, you can see in the middle it says An Loc, Saigon, War Zone D and C. About halfway between Ben Hoa and An Loc is the first area I was at, and I was with the 1st Brigade of the 1st Infantry Division, 1st Battalion, 2nd Infantry.
Your job was?
I started out being a platoon leader, rifle platoon leader in Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 2nd Infantry. Did that. Then I became a company commander of Charlie Company, and then several other companies. And then one of the other jobs I had was an operations officer for a battalion-sized task force. It's interesting because most of the company commander is a captain slot. I was first lieutenant, barely. And back then, if you lived a year, you were promoted to first lieutenant. If you lived another year, you got captain. So I think I told you that was one claim to fame of life. I was supposedly the youngest captain in the history of the Army. There's a gentleman that was born in Denver, Colorado at the exact